September edition of Operation City on the Hill. I'm your host, Robert Maynard. Tonight we're going to be talking about creating a culture of entrepreneurship. And my guest is going to be Thomas Dickerson, who is Ph.D. and the founder of Geopipe. And he's going to be introducing himself in a moment. But we're going to be I'm going to refer to a study, which we'll get into in a minute. We're going to be talking about how can we inspire young people to want to become entrepreneurs, which is obvious main step in creating a culture of entrepreneurship is reaching young people. Tom, tell us a little bit about your background and about Geopipe.
Yeah, so I'll start with a little bit about Geopipe and then a little bit about myself. So Geopipe is a fairly early stage startup. We've been operating for about 3 years, and we produce semantically labeled 3D models of the real world that anybody who's interested in modeling the real world on the computer can download and use in their own application. So that could be an architect who wants to put their design into the context of the existing neighborhood. That could also be a video game designer who wants to create a video game set in the real world. That could be somebody making training simulations for first responders. My co-founder and I met about 15 years ago at this point on the internet through a shared hobby of programming graphing calculators, and then later teaching those sorts of skills to primarily high school students, but other people with that same hobby, and began collaborating on a number of projects.
Now, I'm going to come back on that because that's one of the things that I was really interested in, as I mentioned earlier. But your undergraduate degree was at St. Michael's?
Yes, yeah. So I studied computer science, mathematics, and physics at St. Mike's. And then I went to Brown and did a Ph.D. in computer science. Which I finished up actually just this May.
And you met your future co-founder while you were both still in high school.
Yes.
You were high school students at the time.
Yeah.
And you were working on projects together. Tell us.
Yeah.
Let's go into that a little bit more.
Yeah. So actually, my co-founder is about 3 years older than me. So he was a senior in high school. I was a freshman in high school. He was growing up in New York City, going to a private school in Manhattan. I was growing up here in Vermont, going to a public school in Addison County. And we both, had this hobby of programming graphing calculators. So there's, it's obviously a fairly niche hobby. There wasn't really anybody in my high school who had the same interests, but I was able to find a community of people online with similar interests. And Christopher was spearheading a project to try to be able to connect graphing calculators to the internet. And so he is primarily coming from a hardware background. He ended up doing a bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering before kind of switching back to a more traditional computer science for his PhD. But he wanted to basically build the hardware that would allow you to plug your calculator into the internet, and was looking for somebody to collaborate with who could put basically the software side of that together.
Now, you said that he was putting together, was this something he was doing on his own, something part of the private school he was going to? How?
This was just kind of his passion project and his hobby at the time.
Okay, so he just...
doing electronics design.
Now, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think I read somewhere on your website that he was, prior to founding Geopipe, he modeled New York City for a Minecraft game?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so that was actually after we started. Obviously our first projects together were on calculators, but we both kind of had an interest in hobby video game design, and so we started working together on a number of video game projects centered around this idea of what's called an open world sandbox game. And the idea is that the gameplay itself has fairly loose set of rules, and there's not necessarily a fixed linear storyline, but players are able to go and explore the world. Minecraft is a great example of that genre. Is definitely one of the most open world, most kind of sandboxy sorts of games out there. And Christopher had this vision of being able to take New York City and be able to put it into Minecraft at a one-to-one scale. And it was actually that project that we worked on together. At that point, he was studying distributed systems at NYU as a PhD student, and I had a fair amount of experience in kind of geometric and geospatial simulation. And so, we were taking my algorithmic and geometric, understanding of the world and his, ability to build systems at a really large scale and kind of integrating those to create Minecraft models.
That's interesting because I don't know much about Minecraft myself. I'm 60 years old, so I'm kind of over the hill. But my son is into Minecraft a lot, and it's very popular.
Yes.
And it's interesting that the project that you started that was the impetus for the beginning, for the creation of your startup company, was related to an online video game.
Yeah. So one of the things that's, I think, very interesting about entrepreneurship is it's, you have to first be doing something that you're really passionate about.
Right.
Because if you're, most startup companies fail, and most of them fail pretty early on. And so if it's not something that you're passionate about, you're probably not going to be willing to take the risk to go out there in the first place. The second thing is, it's really about finding problems that you can solve for other people. And so, as we were trying to get Minecraft or get the real world into Minecraft at a one-to-one scale, we realized that the raw data sets about the world were pretty easily accessible, but that there wasn't really a repository where we could go and get the kind of the process models that we wanted to then apply our own algorithms to get that kind of Minecraft representation. So, we thought, we'll be able to go to Google Earth. Google Earth has 3D models of the world, and we'll just download the Google Earth models, and then we'll do our thing on top of that. And of course, you can't actually just go and download Google Earth models. Google, doesn't really want you to do that. But even if you could, Google Earth models don't capture a lot of information about what's in the world. It's kind of a snapshot of how it looked in time. So if you look, you'll see a building, but it's just a photo of the outside of the building pasted around. You don't, there's no understanding that, the windows, for example, are made out of glass. And so to put that into a video game environment, you just don't have the information that you need for players, right? Because a player wants to be able to hit the glass and break the glass, and if you don't know it's glass, you can't do that. So we realized we couldn't be the only people who had this problem, and that was really the problem that led us to start Geopipe.
Okay, so that the lack of availability of this type of service, something that's practically useful, is interesting. Now, you mentioned something that's going to lead into the main topic of what I want to discuss, is you have to have a passion for something.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the passion that linked you guys together, I mean, you both were studied, your studies helped a lot, but in one sense it wasn't so much your degrees or this passion wasn't linked to you through some activity you did in school.
Right.
But it was a passion you guys followed independently.
Right.
And so in a sense, you kind of found each other.
Right.
This kind of, in a roundabout way, is again that we were looking at these studies that I brought up one and you brought up one. There's a organization. The main organization, the initials is JA, Junior Achievement, and their main focus is to promote the achievement of young people. And they've done they've commissioned a lot of surveys, studies on entrepreneurial mindset among young people and their parents and in the interaction in between, boys and girls, men, women. So they found out that the parents in general had a very high hope for their kids to become, they didn't know how to do it, but they had a high hope their kids to become entrepreneurs. But the percentage of the kids, of their children that had that high hope was a lot less, and a big part of the problem was risk management. How to get the capital, of course, but not knowing how to go about it, not having peers that were similarly interested, not having role models, not getting support from the community around them. So if you add up most of the factors, you go through and we'll forget the numbers for a minute because I don't want to spend the rest of the show going into numbers. But if you add up these factors, most of these factors point to the underlying support within the culture. Mm-hmm. And what do you think is possible in our education system to revamp the education system so that there is, could you envision how if it was up to you and you had to reform the education system, is there a way, or how would you encourage these kind of interactions? Take what happened in your situation, which was kind of hit and miss.
Right.
It was almost accidental. How do we formalize that and make that more widely available for young people?
Yeah. So I think there's probably a couple of pieces to this. So one is actually something you mentioned, which is support from families, and I think there's actually been a fairly drastic regime change in terms of how kind of parents view children who have entrepreneurial aspirations, compared to, say, even 15 years ago. That I think the success of companies like Facebook or Microsoft or most of these large tech companies have fairly scrappy beginnings.
Right.
And I think in a lot of ways that legitimized entrepreneurship in kind of the eyes of mainstream culture in a way that you would not have seen if you'd done the same survey and said, hey, do your parents support you being an entrepreneur? And you'd asked that question 15 years ago, I suspect you would have gotten very different responses. But I think you're absolutely right that the cultural, at least at a national scale, the culture certainly is not in place to support entrepreneurship across the board. But there are, I think, regionally a lot of interesting models that people are starting to figure out what the pieces of that are. And here in Vermont, obviously there's VCET, Vermont Center for Emerging Technologies,
right.
Which is trying to provide a supportive ecosystem for entrepreneurship. Geopipe actually got started through the New York City entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is definitely a lot more developed than the ecosystem here in Vermont.
Is it related to VCEP, or are they connected? Or?
No, although I think there's a number of similar philosophies to some of the organizations that we were involved with in New York, and how VCET operates. But the thing that was probably the biggest starting point for us was a program through New York University called their Summer Launchpad, and it follows a curriculum called Lean Launchpad. This is actually shared by the National Science Foundation. Has a program called I-Corps that they use to help small, research-oriented small businesses get off the ground, and it's a very similar curriculum to that. And they give every company that gets into the NYU Summer Launchpad gets $10,000, and then they go through a 10-week course where you basically learn to think about a startup in terms of hypothesis testing and building a business model, and forming hypotheses about what will make this a successful business, and then going out and actually talking to potential customers or people in your customer ecosystem to try to confirm or falsify those hypotheses as quickly as possible. But they also put in a tremendous amount of work to connect you to mentors and to potential investors who can help guide you as you're in that very early stage, very formative stage of your startup. And there's a number of other, if you look at other large cities and other large universities, there's similar models that are starting to emerge. But I definitely think it's going to take some work for that to kind of spread to really I everybody in this country.
Getting back to this cultural model, I think. When I was in high school, we used to watch it a lot more when I was in college, but we used to watch reruns of the Star Trek series. Yeah. The original one with Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. But the people who grew up on the Star Trek series became idealists about space travel. Yeah. And then eventually that idealism bubbled into a push, and out of that you had NASA, and you had the moon landing, and you had President Kennedy saying we want to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they're easy, because they're hard. But then you had this oh, we went to the moon, but it was all because we wanted to beat the Russians.
Yeah.
And then it didn't happen. It didn't go very, but now you have Elon Musk and you have SpaceX and you have Orbit, what is the name of that? There's a bunch of companies,
Yeah.
near Earth or asteroid mining companies.
Yeah,
and
planetary resources.
Planetary resources, and then there's Blue Horizon who's going. So this whole genre of space exploration, it seems to be coming around again, but this time it's not centered on NASA and a moon race between the United States and the Soviet Union. It's centered on a lot of these private companies.
Well, in some sense, I actually think that what we're seeing now in kind of private space exploration is the result of the kids who grew up on Star Trek, right? In some sense, right, when Star Trek first came out,
right,
in some sense it was concurrent with when the U.S. space program was at its peak, which means that the generation that was leading that initial space race push was not the generation who were formed by Star Trek. It was right. It's the generation after who then not only grew up on Star Trek with all these high hopes of what's it going to look like when we go and explore space, but then followed that up with kind of the existential disappointment of how things actually turned out.
The government didn't deliver, so we're going to deliver ourselves.
Right, and whether regardless of how you feel about whether or not it's an appropriate role for the government to be the ones leading space travel, certainly they didn't deliver on the scale that people hoped that they would. And so now that you have these tech company billionaires who grew up on a vision of wanting to go to space and have massive amounts of money to throw at the problem, I think that's why we're starting to see privatized space travel come to fruition.
And then another, I'm going to touch on one of my pet peeves. Is going to be getting a little bit off topic here, but we have Web 3.0 coming with the blockchain technology that's supposedly going to decentralize the way data is stored, which means you got sharing economy where you have Uber and companies like that, where the ones who run the platform make most of the money. Supposedly, these companies like Uber, if you had a decentralized data storing system, you would be able to eliminate the middleman, and potentially now your taxi drivers or your Uber drivers are the ones directly. That has a lot of applications, not just in the high-tech field, but in the sharing economy, which now people has got a bad image because you get the people who own the platform making all the money and the people who are actually doing the service making a little bit. But that's arguably because of the data system is centralized.
Yeah. So I've done actually a fair amount of academic research specifically on blockchain technology. Okay, so I can talk about that a little bit. But I think really, when you look at the companies that are making money on the sharing economy, what they're making money on is really solving the coordination problem, right? So the people who have the cars, are using Uber as an example, right? The people who have the cars that they're not really utilizing, basically have a resource that they could commoditize if they could find customers, right? And the people who need to get from their house to their work but don't have a car, need to get from the
need to find the people with the cars.
Need to find people with the cars, and Uber has made it really easy to solve that coordination problem. There's certainly, coordination problems and scheduling problems are, algorithmically fairly difficult areas of computer science. But there's certainly no reason why they need to be done in, a centralized fashion that's totally, as a black box to everybody on the inside. So certainly, I think, blockchain technology has the potential to really change how people solve those sorts of coordination problems. I'll add a little bit of a technical aside here, which is that The real breakthrough of blockchain technology is that it gives you, not just a distributed way to store data, but a distributed way to store data that's tamper-proof and public, right? So what it gives you is it's a ledger,
security issue.
right? It's a ledger of transactions, so that you can go back and say, this person, agreed to give me this much money, 2 days ago, and there's no way for them to go back on that. Because it's out there for the world to see forever. There's a lot of coordination problems that require private data, which blockchain by itself is not necessarily well equipped to handle. Because if you want a ride from say the airport to your office, you may not want to tell everybody. You may not want to tell the whole world that you're at the airport, and also the address of your office or the address of your house. There are other technologies that are evolving that are well posed to be able to solve those sorts of private data management issues, but still decentralized. And I think as we start to see those technologies mature kind of in conjunction with blockchain, that will change a lot of how people do business online.
There's, are you familiar with George Gilder?
No.
He's an economist, but he's also a techno-futurist. He's retired now, he's a little bit older gentleman, but he was predicting all these trends. And he's pretty high on this next iteration of the internet. He wrote this book called Life After Google.
Okay. And
he's talking about all the different implications of decentralized interaction. And also you mentioned about the ledger and how it's more secure.
Right.
And today, one of the biggest problems that people have with going on the web is identity theft.
Yeah.
And he said so not only are your interactions decentralized, but it reshapes a society from the bottom up. I mean, it has a large impact on the way people interact, but the security concerns is a whole different animal because of the way
you mean specifically with regards to like identity?
Yeah, because one of the things that keeps people away from, they're afraid to go on the internet because identity theft has become a really big thing, and you have all this information you have to give away, and you've got to remember passwords, and the newer technology, decentralized ledger-based technology, handles that in a way that is causing it to probably be implemented faster than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, so there's actually there's a number of different ways that these decentralized ledger, blockchain ledgers can be implemented. Some of them, identity is a key component, right? So broadly, these are typically classified as permissioned or permissionless blockchains, and it's not great terminology, but roughly what it means is, does the set of participants have to be vetted in advance, and are their identities known, versus can anybody participate and potentially participate either anonymously or at least under a pseudonym, and certainly from a privacy perspective, if you can make a financial transaction without the other party needing to know your identity, that definitely changes a lot of things around, your credit rating, right? It's much harder to attach, real, legal persons to these sorts of financial interactions. It doesn't necessarily reduce the likelihood of your personal information being stolen. In right, if somebody steals your actual credit card number, right? That credit card numbers are basically a secret number that your credit card company knows, and the merchants that you do business with know. And if somebody gets that, they can run transactions as you. And at least as things stand now, cryptocurrencies that run on the blockchain have a similar problem where you have basically a secret key that controls your identity, and it's a little bit more secure in that you don't actually have to give that key to other people. you always keep your secret key to yourself, and you only share your public key. But the same thing is true that if your secret key is compromised, somebody will have access to all of your financial resources. And unlike, say a credit card, because there's no, external centralized entity to kind of tie the legal framework together with the financial framework, there's just kind of a set of rules and programs. The program doesn't know who's running this. And so if after the fact you say, no, I got scammed, right? Somebody stole my secret key, you're probably not going to get your money back because it's not, there's no centralized institution backing it up. So there's definitely, trade-offs that come with centralization versus decentralization.
The other thing we were talking about the impetus that the Star Trek series had with the people who are now. The interesting thing, it wasn't just a technological. It was an imaginative piece.
Right.
It plays upon people's imagination. Space, the final frontier, and today you got things coming out of. Well, we talked earlier about Minecraft.
Yeah.
How can we better leverage these imaginative, social media phenomena to publicize or the narrative, create a narrative that links imagination with entrepreneurship?
It's a good question. I think so. Sticking kind of just very briefly with Minecraft and kind of artistic experiences like that there's a problem-solving component associated with it, and I think learning those problem-solving skills is something that's essential to to being an entrepreneur or being an engineer or having the sorts of skill sets you would need to apply to entrepreneurship, but making that cognitive connection for the people participating in it, that this isn't just an art project, that this is something that learning to solve problems in this way can actually,
because the problem solving, there's a technical analytical function to it, but there's also an imaginative, and sometimes the engineering and tech field have a hard time creating the imaginative imaginary narrative in order to inspire people to get.
And so I think there definitely needs to be some way of communicating to people that when you're doing these sorts of imaginative undertakings that are also helping you develop technical skills, that this is helping prepare you for entrepreneurship.
Okay, well, I think that's something that we might want to, as we were talking earlier, maybe we follow up with the people who work at the center and see if that's something that through this show I've been discussing this kind of thing for on different programs, but maybe we should follow up on that. And
actually, just something that just occurred to me is there actually are now a number of platforms specifically actually for artistic endeavors that help basically people creating things at the scale of home crafts or making to share that and commercialize that. So Shapeways, Etsy, Patreon, even YouTube or Twitch are all platforms for individual content creators to be able to commercialize what they're doing, which I think is encouraging a spirit of entrepreneurship.
And we need to, what we call the opinion leaders in a society, your educators, your religious leaders, your media, the ones who shape public opinion, seem to be slower in catching on. And I think there needs to be a concentrated effort to reach the opinion leaders that shape the opinions of civil society and say, look, this is what's going on. And if you want to help people that are potentially left behind in the digital economy, it's going to be happening. Transactions will happen too fast. It's going to be hard to regulate. So you got to motivate and you got to inspire civil society. You're not going to have these global regulations. It's going to be too slow, and it's not going to happen. And some maybe some type of education. The abolitionist movement in the 19th century, there was a global educational movement to inspire that. So maybe we should adopt something similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think the internet certainly provides the right platform.
You have the platform, just the ones. Well, it's taking time for the new information. The new information systems are replacing the old information systems. So the opinion leaders are changing, and I think the changing of the guard has left a lot of people shell-shocked.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, in physics, there's kind of a
paradigm shift.
Well, what I was going to say is there's actually kind of a joke that, you know, if you have some groundbreaking new theory in physics, the best way to make sure that it's widely accepted is to wait 20 years for a new generation of physicists to learn it in school. So, you know, I think a lot of things, you know, just take time, you know, not just to, you know, you're always, you know, you can try to change people's opinions who, you know, have already, you know, established, you know, they're thinking about one way of doing things, but it's always going to be easier to kind of inform the views of people who are still, you know, learning.
Still forming their views.
Still forming their views.
So get that brings us back to the education system and the young people.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.